So you know the classic story, Street Fighter II came along in 1991 and became a big hit, spawning not only a franchise of video games that would spin off several other products such as animated features, movies, and comics, but also served as the genesis of the modern-day fighting game as we know it, with many other games continuing where Capcom's flagship fighter left off. However, while people might have heard of Street Fighter II at the time, not a whole lot of people recall the original Street Fighter that came before. Fewer doubted the existence of a Street Fighter 1. But indeed, such a game did exist, as Street Fighter first graced arcade establishments everywhere back in 1987. Seems rather odd that Street Fighter 2 would get all the fame and attention while Street Fighter 1 was relegated to nothing more than a historical footnote in this franchise's origins. Street Fighter 1 isn't as fondly remembered as Street Fighter 2, and for good reason, because when you sit down and actually play Street Fighter, you'll find a game that was not very good. And that would be an extremely nice way of putting it. Street Fighter has a very modest tale. You either control Ryu, player 1, or Ken, player 2, and must travel around the world to defeat mighty challengers looking to impede your progress towards the final match against the champion, none other than the scarless Muay Thai fighter Sagat. You could choose which country to start off with and deal with the two fighters native to that country, and every two fights you'll partake in bonus rounds of breaking boards and stones for bonus points before progressing to the next country. It's pretty simple, straightforward stuff, really. Back then, there were no such things as character selects. You either played player 1, Ryu, or player 2, Ken. Both characters played exactly the same way with no gameplay differences between the two. Both characters hop around the playfield rather than walk. Both have the same three special moves, Fireball, Dragon Punch, and Hurricane Kick, but they are a burden to attempt as you have to be precise in your control inputs. But if you did pull off these moves, they were truly destructive weapons. Street Fighter 1 boasted 6-button controls, or, in some cases, 2 big buttons powered by hydraulics or something like that. You see, the way it works is like the harder you hit the button, the harder your punch came out. But regardless of the setup, the end result are controls that are plagued by delays. There's a long lag between the moment you press a button and the moment a move executes, which means you have to plan ahead slightly if you want to press your attack. Attacks which cannot be cancelled into another move, by the way. The animation of the first attack will always play itself out before the next attack commences. It's pretty sluggish overall, and a detrimental factor to a Street Fighter game that's already difficult enough, with the enemy's fighters possessing better agility and attack power than Ryu or Kimi. Wait. Street Fighter doesn't look pretty. It's a completely different looking game compared to its eventual successors with short, chubby looking characters with choppy animation and really bland looking stage layouts. Goes without saying that this is probably the worst looking Street Fighter arcade title of the bunch, but as an arcade from 1987, it's passable fare, I suppose. I mean, it's rather colorful, the mugshots look rather nice, and the fighters look rather generic and slightly realistic rather than exaggerated. It's your typical 1980s arcades graphics. Not much to look at, good enough for what it is, but not necessarily classic either. The same could be said for the sound of Street Fighter. Some awkward sounding sound effects that sound pretty weak, along with scratchy voiceovers that sound pretty bad. It's nice that they implemented sound bites for the end fight intermissions. It's a nice touch, but the dubbing sounds pretty bad. As for the music in this game, it's pretty generic arcade music with no memorable tracks of note. Street Fighter 1's place in history is based solely on the fact that it's the predecessor to the vastly superior Street Fighter 2, which not only improved upon the gameplay of the original to the point where the name is practically the only thing the two have in common, but sparked a massive burst of popularity in the one-on-one fighting game genre. Street Fighter 1 had the makings of a good game but lacked the polish and refinements that made Street Fighter 2 such a pleasure to play in either a laid-back casual sense or a pure competitive sense. The delayed, controlled, awkward gameplay and general lack of replay value are a number of reasons why you're never going to see any Street Fighter 1 tournaments in a competitive sense. I suppose some credit is due. In spite of its issues, Street Fighter did well enough to warrant a sequel at least, and in that sense, Street Fighter does merit a couple playthroughs, at least just to see where it all began, but not much more than that. By the way, on a side note, I really want to see people put together a Street Fighter 1 tournament just to see who comes off on top, and just to see if anyone's going to produce memorable moments with that game. That'd be a nice sight for sore eyes, actually.